Today, I think what's really important is that all warfare today on this planet is coordinated and directed by military satellites, military space satellites, and it's all directed to the end of controlling declining resources around the world. And so the U.S. military today has become the military arm of corporate globalization.
I want to thank you very much, Bruce, for giving me a few moments of your life.
No problem.
To be here and interview, it's my honor.
Thank you.
And I want to, if you don't mind, to start, to just tell us who you are.
Yeah, my name is Bruce Gagnon. I live in Bath, Maine, and I work for a group called the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. And actually, it's our 20th year this year of operation.
And tell us about your operation, the Global Network. Tell us what it is.
Well, it's essentially a coalition of peace groups and church committees all over the world, about 150 different groups in many, many countries all over the world. As the U.S. Space Command accelerated its development of space technology for modern warfare, we learned that they were setting up bases all over the planet, what they call essentially downlink stations, places that receive signals from orbiting satellites. And so all over the world then they've set up these bases that are key parts, each of them, to this whole U.S. full spectrum dominance program. And so people in these communities, England, Australia, New Zealand, Greenland, all over the world are saying, Sweden, we don't want our country to be used as a base for the U.S. Star Wars program. And so these are the members of the organization. And also communities like here in the United States where significant installations are, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, places like that, where they're building various components for this space warfare program. Peace groups in those communities are also part of the global network.
How did you get here yourself? How did you get involved? Are you part of the intelligentsia, part of the intelligence services, anything? What is your background into this picture?
No, actually, I'm the opposite of the intelligentsia. I'm a working class kid who grew up in a military family. My dad was an enlisted man in the Air Force. He worked on the spy cameras on U.S. spy planes. And I grew up living on military bases, thinking that we were the patriots, that I was a young Republican for Nixon in 1968. So in 1971, I joined the Air Force, and after my training was sent to a base in California that was an airlift base for the war, Travis Air Force Base, and GIs would come from all over the country to get on planes to go to Vietnam. And when these planes would come back, they would bring wounded people, they would bring the body bags of dead soldiers, and so there was a lot of anti-war activity at my base. Outside the gate on the weekends, there was a GI coffee house just off the base, and at night there would be meetings in the barracks. And so as it turned out, my good fortune, my first roommate was one of the leading organizers in the GI resistance movement. So I was really a lucky guy that at night there would be these knocks on the door, and one night white guys would come in with chairs and sit in a circle and talk about the war in Vietnam. Another night black guys would come in with chairs and sit in a circle and talk about racism. They were Black Panthers from the big cities. And I'm sitting in the corner, thinking, oh my God, these all have to be commies, because I'd never been exposed to anything like this before. I'm living on military bases behind the barbed wire fences, going to Air Force controlled schools my whole life. And but within a few months, things really started to turn around for me. The first time I'd ever been exposed to this way of thinking, these people had good hearts, and the things they were saying made sense to me. So my chair moved into the circle. I became a GI resistor. And after I got out of the Air Force, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew that I wanted to never put myself in a position like that again. So eventually led me to becoming an organizer, first with the United Farm Workers Union, Cesar Chavez's union, in Florida, organizing fruit pickers, and then from there into the peace movement. And because I lived in Florida in the early 80s, started working in the peace movement, it was very natural because right in our bioregion, if you will, right in our community in Central Florida was the Space Center. And so our group, the Florida Coalition for Peace and Justice, that I coordinated for 15 years, began working on space issues. And out of that, we created, along with our friends in Colorado, the Citizens for Peace and Space, we created the Global Network.
So how old were you when you came out of the military?
I was 22 years old when I got out of the military.
And how long did you service?
I was in 3.5 years.
So you joined like when you were 18?
Yeah, right out of high school. And so I called it 3.5 years of hard time. Because after I figured out what was really going on, after the first 6 months of being in the military, after I figured it out, it was like being in prison. My spirit, my soul was in prison for those years.
So they changed you, but they changed you for a positive thing, not according to what they wanted.
Exactly. And you know, I gotta say, it made me a total believer in protests at military bases, because almost every weekend while I was at this base, Travis Air Force Base, there was a dedicated small group of 8 to 10, 12 people there every week holding their signs, standing outside the gate. And I can just imagine what they're saying to each other, holding their sign. You think it does any good? You think anyone's paying any attention to us? You think we'll ever stop this war? And little did they know that we would talk about them. We had 15,000 people on our base permanently, plus all the thousands that came and went on the airplanes to Vietnam and back. And we would talk about these protesters in the chow hall, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, on our job, in the barracks at night. We would talk about them. And it really helped escalate my own conscientiousness, you know, my own consciousness rising, growing, coming alive. And so I'm eternally grateful for those people. And I'm a firm believer in protests at the gates. It's one of those things where we can't quantify and qualify, you know, how these protests really affect people. We don't really know. We have no clue. We never will know. But I just know from my own experience that they change people's lives.
Well, let's talk about military and since you have a very good background of it, you've been part of it and all that. So this Cold War, and talk about the Cold War and how did it affect U.S. military budget and all that.
You're talking about the time with the Soviet Union and the...
Yeah, I'm interested in like to hear you talk about militarization of a space, but that's a sub part. It's a part of the U.S. military budget, and U.S. military budget is it's really coming from Cold War era that we are where we are right now. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, let me say this. I think few people know the story about after World War II was over, that the U.S. rounded up the former Nazi scientists. They rounded up former Nazi intelligence people and brought them to the U.S. to create the CIA. And altogether, they smuggled into the U.S. 1,500 Nazi operatives in a program called Operation Paperclip. And what really happened, what we now know, is that the U.S. started seeing that with the defeat of the Nazis and with the essentially surrounding of the Soviet Union that happened after, as the Cold War began, and the containment, quote unquote, of the Soviet Union, that the U.S. was on its way to becoming, you know, the world's empire. And they were very excited about that. But they knew that in order to carry this mission out, that they needed to have massive military spending and complete demonization of the Soviet Union, and most importantly, I think, of making the American people absolutely fearful of external enemies. And so this process has really created, I think, this whole structure that we have today, the structure of permanent war, the structure of secret military budgets that actually were copied from Hitler. Hitler had a black budget, a secret military budget that he used to develop his high-tech weapon systems that was brought over by these Nazis into our country. And so we've really replicated all the very worst elements of the former Nazi military regime into our own, and use that as the military arm of this corporate globalist empire that is now run amok around the world. So today, I think what's really important is that all warfare today on this planet is coordinated and directed by military satellites, military space satellites, and it's all directed to the end of controlling declining resources around the world. Water, oil, natural gas, declining minerals that are used for computers and cell phones and everything else that are increasingly found in just a few places, parts of Latin America or Africa. And so the U.S. military today has become the military arm of corporate globalization. And, you know, the Pentagon says that under corporate globalization, every country is going to have a different role. And our role in America will be security export. Our job is going to be to go out to these places, what they call the non-integrating gap, the places around the world that are not yet fully under the control of corporate globalization, and secure them to benefit of the corporate agenda. And so that's why we're in the Middle East. They identify Central Asia, they identify Africa, and they identify parts of Latin America. These are the places in the coming period where we will be in a state of endless war to give the corporations complete control over the resources. The governments will set up puppet governments that we meaning the corporations, control. And this will be the job of the American people. And so it's no coincidence today that the #1 industrial export product of America is military production, is weapons. And in fact, my state in Maine, Bath Iron Works, where they build the Aegis destroyers that are now being outfitted with missile defense systems that are being used to surround Russia and China. It's Bath Iron Works, where they make these, is the #1 employer in the state of Maine. So we see this now all over the country. In Colorado Springs, Colorado, 50% of the jobs are within the military-industrial complex. In Huntsville, Alabama, they call it Pentagon South. About 75% of the jobs in that community are related to military production, testing, all that military development. So this is the role for America in this coming period under corporate globalization.
So I remember military having a vision of 2020 vision about using the space, satellite, laser, and all that. Can you talk about the militarization of the space?
Well, as I said earlier, all warfare today on the planet is coordinated by space technology. When Bush launched Shock and Awe in 2003, in the initial attack, 70% of the weapons that were used were directed and guided to their targets by military satellites. So the Pentagon recognizes that whoever controls space is going to control the Earth below. And so the Pentagon is saying, well, gee, if we could do that, so could another country, right? So we can't allow any other country to have access to space. We have to be the master of space. And so this planning document that the Space Command created some years ago, called Vision for 2020, lays out this whole plan, where they say that we're going to be the master of space, we're going to control and dominate space, and most importantly, we're going to deny other countries access to space. so that we, during times of conflict, control everything. And so for years, they've been working at the Space Command on developing things like anti-satellite weapons. Weapons that would allow the United States to destroy other countries' satellites, giving us control of the Earth, giving us the ability to win all the wars. But, every action, there's a reaction. It's physics, law of physics, right? What happens when you start blowing up other countries' satellites? Well, you create all kinds of space debris, space junk, that they're now finding is putting our own military satellites in jeopardy. Just very recently, they had to take the couple Americans and Russians that were on the International Space Station, put them into an escape module because they were tracking space junk that was coming really dangerously close to the space station. And they had to move the space station to another orbit as they were tracking this space junk. And so they're now saying that, our plan to develop anti-satellite weapons has to be readjusted. And so that's why we're seeing, if you listen close, you'll hear a lot of talk these days about cyber warfare. So this is kind of a new program. And so the Pentagon is terrifying the American people. The Russians are coming, the Chinese are coming. They're going to take control of our computers. They're going to crawl inside of our computers with cyber warfare. So we need a cyber command. We need a lot of money to develop our cyber war capability, when in fact, we're leading the world in cyber warfare technology today. We've now created, the Pentagon has created a cyber command. And the idea is that you preemptively, before you're going to attack anyone, use your cyber warfare team to crawl inside of someone else's computers. We did this in Yugoslavia when Clinton was president, when we in NATO, the United States and NATO attacked Yugoslavia. Again, when the U.S. and NATO attacked Libya more recently, the same thing was done again. The Cyber Command crawled inside of the computers of those countries, shut down their air defense system. So as U.S. and NATO warplanes went to attack those countries, they had no ability to defend themselves because their systems were shut down. And so the U.S. is developing this technology to really go after Russia and China ultimately. And so they're having to respond now. But the way the Pentagon spins it is that Russia and China are leading this whole new arms race in cyber warfare, when in fact the reverse is the truth.
So this heightened military budget, it's affecting all of us here who live in this country. We're losing our teachers, we're losing our nurses, Can you elaborate on this aspect of military budget versus civilian budget?
Well, some years ago, in one of the industry publications called Space News, there was an editorial. And they said, we have to be responsible corporate citizens. We've got to send our lobbyists to Washington to secure a permanent funding source. Because for a long time, the Pentagon has acknowledged that an arms race in space and everything that goes with it, all the ground stations around the planet, these downlink receiving stations, this whole system of modern warfare, net-centric warfare they call it, all tied through computers to satellites and everything else, was going to be the largest industrial project in the history of the planet Earth. So they're saying, we've got to be responsible corporate citizens. We've got to come up with our own funding source. So in this editorial in Space News, they said, and we have. And we're now sending our lobbyists to Washington to secure that funding source. And they said, it is the entitlement programs, which officially in America are Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and what's left of the welfare program after Bill Clinton got finished with it. So this is why in the last few years we've seen this heightened attack on these so-called entitlement programs by not only the Republicans, but also the Democrats. We see the Democrats, some of the leaders now saying, well, we've got to increase the retirement age in Social Security. We've got to go after these entitlements because they're budget breakers. They're helping to increase the deficit. And so both parties, both wings of this single war party, if you will, are together telling the American people that we've got to reduce or destroy social progress in America in order to move the money into the Pentagon budget, which they've created essentially a firewall around, saying that we really can't go after it. Now, the Obama administration has said, let's make some cuts in Pentagon spending. He's proposed $600 billion of cuts over 10 years. We'll do the math. 10 into 600 is 60. So Obama is proposing $60 billion a year cuts in a Pentagon budget that when you add it all up is $1 trillion a year. That's nothing. Obama is talking about cutting virtually nothing out of the military budget. In fact, recent stories have said they're going to take the money out of retirement pay. They're going to take the money out of health care. I'm talking about retirement pay for veterans, out of health care for veterans. They're going to take the money out of reducing the numbers of troops in the military. That's why you see them going more towards robotics, more towards unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, other systems where they don't need so many troops. And because they're saying that these are the areas that we'll reduce military spending in, but we're not going to take money out of the big production programs. We want to keep Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, General Dynamics, and the rest of the big weapons corporations that comprise the military-industrial complex. We're going to keep them humming. Let me tell you a story to illustrate the power of the military-industrial complex. In 2008, just before the election, Obama versus John McCain, the war hawk. A friend of mine in Maine, an old man, said to me, "Bruce, have you ever heard of the Crown family in Chicago?" I said, "No, I've never heard of them." He said, "Go home and Google Crown, C-R-O-W-N, Chicago." So I did. And what I learned was that the Crown family, at the time of the election in 2008, was the majority stockholders in the General Dynamics Corporation. Oh my God, General Dynamics. Those are the people that own Bath Iron Works, where I live in Maine, where they build the Aegis destroyers that are being outfitted with missile defense systems that are now being used to surround Russia and China. And what I learned as I further researched the Crown family was that they were early supporters of Barack Obama for president. In fact, the Crown family collectively gave Obama $500,000 in campaign donations in 2008 for his election. And they also ran interference for him with the military-industrial complex. They went out and raised money, introduced him to the military-industrial complex across the country. They're a Jewish family. They also organized nationally within the national Jewish community to build support for Obama. And so that after the election, the aerospace industry magazine Aviation Week and Space Technology reported that in 2008, Obama received more campaign donations from the military-industrial complex than John McCain, the war hawk, Republican, right-winger, received. And so what happens after Obama takes office? George W. Bush had a missile defense deployment program that was accentuating one particular version of missile defense systems. When Obama became president, he said Bush's deployments in the Czech Republic and in Poland of these missile defense systems, I'm scratching. And some people cheered. But what they didn't do is watch the magician's hands. You have to watch both of the magician's hands. And so what Obama soon did was to announce that we're going to deploy a different version of missile defense. We're going to accentuate the Aegis destroyers with missile defense systems on board that are made by Bath Iron Works, which is owned by General Dynamics, who helped me get elected. And now, today, let me just give you an illustration. The DDG-51, the previous version of Aegis destroyers, cost $1.5 billion each. They've been outfitted with these missile defense systems. A new version is now under construction called the DDG-1000. These ships are going to cost between $3 and $5 billion each. So Obama has rewarded General Dynamics for helping to make him president of the United States. And he is now deploying these Aegis destroyers in the Mediterranean and the Baltic and the Black Seas surrounding Russia. He's also deploying these systems, he's going to take some of them off the ships and make a land-based version of it, and he's going to put them in Romania. He's already deployed other missile defense systems in Poland. He's going to put a missile defense radar system in Turkey and probably in Georgia on Russia's southern border. And with NATO expansion, they are now literally surrounding Russia. Why? Why do you want to restart the Cold War with Russia? Remember, Obama said he was going to reset relations. He wanted to get rid of our nuclear weapons and talk to Russia about getting rid of their nuclear weapons. Why is he doing this? And Russia is now freaking out. They're saying our recent agreement on the New START treaty, which did reduce in a modest way some nuclear weapons on both sides, they said, you keep moving forward with this missile defense encirclement of us, and we, Russia, are going to have to pull out of the New START treaty. Because if we reduce our nuclear weapons, we're going to leave ourselves vulnerable to your missile defense system. At the same time, Obama has announced recently a pivot of U.S. foreign and military policy toward the Asia-Pacific region. And he is now deploying these missile defense systems in Taiwan, in Japan, Okinawa, South Korea, Australia, and he's talking to other countries as well. They're building a Navy base on little Jeju Island in South Korea, just off the Korean Peninsula, that sits 300 miles from the coast of mainland China. And these U.S. Aegis destroyers are going to be based there as well. A 400-year-old fishing and farming village is being torn asunder as this Navy base is being developed. And we've been trying to support these villagers in every way possible. In fact, they invited us to hold our annual meeting. Every year we have an annual meeting in a different country, in a different part of the world. They invited us to come there in February 2012 to hold our annual meeting there. And we crawled under razor wire. 16 of us were arrested by the South Korean police trying to go on to the lands that were the sacred rocky coast of this village. Now, what's the story with these missile defense systems? What is missile defense really about? Well, as it turns out, there are key elements in U.S. first strike planning. And in fact, the U.S. Space Command is wargaming a first strike attack. They do a computer war game every year now, set in the year 2016. It's called the Red Team versus the Blue Team, U.S. versus China. China does admittedly today have 20 nuclear missiles that are capable of hitting the west coast of the United States. And in this war game, this computer war game, the U.S. launches a first strike attack on China using the military space plane, the successor to the shuttle. It flies down from orbit, drops a devastating attack on China. It can either use nuclear or conventional weapons. Other weapons are then used to try to take out China's 20 nuclear missiles capable of hitting the U.S. But inevitably, they don't get all of them. And so then China tries to fire its remaining retaliatory capability at the U.S. in a counterattack. And so in this computer war game, it is then that the missile defense systems are then used to take out the few remaining Chinese retaliatory missiles, giving the U.S. a successful first strike attack. And so missile defense is used after the sword of first strike is thrust into either Russia or China. And then missile defense is the shield that is used to pick off the remaining retaliatory capability of either country. And so it's not in their interests to get rid of their nuclear weapons at a time when they're being surrounded by so-called missile defense systems, what we say are really truly missile offense systems, because they're part of first strike attack planning. And so that's why you see Russia saying, wait a minute, we're going to have to pull out of these New START negotiations and this treaty because we don't want to get rid of our nuclear weapons because that gives you a better chance of taking us out. And that's why we see China saying, we're going to have to build more as you pivot and surround us militarily with these missile defense systems.
So I want to ask you this. With a scenario that you're putting forward, somebody like you with 200 other people like you, what can we do? With such a giant military that has map of the whole universe, globally, everything, why are you challenging that?
Well, because we have to, number one. But I would refer you to that comment by Noam Chomsky where he says, how do you expect people to deal with this, meaning really almost anything, if they don't know about it? So the first thing that we in the Global Network are trying to do, and I think we've had some success in doing, is to begin to get people around the world to really see the writing on the wall, to see how the pieces of the puzzle all fit together, right? And then after that, then you can begin to deal with it. So I think that's a really important factor. And I feel really lucky in my work with the Global Network because I get to travel and go to a lot of places and see a lot of people. You don't know how incredibly moving it is to see the people in Kangjeon village on Jeju Island, South Korea, fishermen and farmers and their supporters from around Korea, the priests and nuns that come there and be arrested, standing up against this right-wing dictatorship run by the South Korean government and essentially run by the Samsung and other big corporations. Their government in South Korea has been taken over by the corporate money, just as ours has, and just as virtually every other government around the world has as well. So you don't know what it's like to see these people nonviolently resisting this police state 12 and 14 hours a day. And then in the evening, at 8 o'clock, organizing a candlelight vigil every night for 5 years, and dancing and singing together, and finding the love and the joy to give them the courage and the strength to go the next day and again non-violently resist for 12 or 14 hours a day. You know, that's power, man. That is unbelievable power. And so this is what I see is out there around the world. And so there's a huge problem that we have to deal with, this corporate domination, this growing military empire that is the U.S. and its NATO functionaries. But at the same time, there's this growing, connected human movement all over this planet. And we've seen it in the Arab Spring. We've seen it in Occupy movement that is growing and connecting the dots, showing the links between the issues. And this is the two great powers in the world today. This power of militarism, but also this power of humanity that is saying that we understand we can't have social progress. We can't have peace. We can't have a real clean environment so that we can live on this Mother Earth at the same time that this military madness exists. So these two forces are on a collision course, like two trains running for a head-on collision. And everything we do in this moment, everything each of us do, helps to derail this military machine and helps to keep alive this beautiful idea of human progress in harmony with our Mother Earth and with nature. And so this is the great epic struggle of our time. And each of us have been given a gift of life on this planet in this moment, that we get to be part of that epic struggle. And so I think it's a rich, rich gift that we all have in this time.
I'm grateful for your time, and I'm pretty sure I didn't ask you everything. If you'd like to add anything, please do so.
Well, I just thank you because I think that you are doing what we need to do is create new media the corporations around the world dominate the media. I was in France after Bush's re-election. I was in France speaking the very next day, and I'll never forget someone saying to me, Le Monde, our newspaper, has been bought by a weapons corporation. And so we're seeing all over the world that the corporate oligarchy, because they've made so much profit on militarism, they've begun to buy up the media, and they control the messages that people get. And the people's minds have become colonized by this corporate consumerism, by this corporate militarism. And so we've got to begin to decolonize our minds if we're going to win this epic struggle that we're in now. And the only way we can do that is by having our own media, our own independent, alternative media. And so what you're doing is really, really important. It's a great contribution. And this whole thing is growing like leaps and bounds around the world, and you're part of that. So I thank you for that.
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it.